I'm going to introduce Chuck here. And for anyone that knows Ranger Chuck, and I always call him Ranger Chuck because he is an Army Ranger, to me, this guy has done all kinds of things. He's got a Bronze Star with V for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, but he's an Army Ranger. We got some more Army Rangers here. Greg's one over there. And I just hold those people that went to that school and acquired that in high regard. But here is his, Chuck Bishop has a lifelong interest in World War II. He had a 21-year Army career followed by 21 years as a Department of the Army civilian employee. Chuck experienced combat as an infantry platoon leader in Vietnam, receiving 2 Purple Heart medals for wounds and a Bronze Star with V, that means Valor, for a medal for combat action. His military career was mainly in operations and training assignments. That means that he mostly did most of his stuff in commands, including 2 tours as a Ranger instructor, and that's pretty prestigious, too, to be called back to be a Ranger instructor at the Ranger School. 1 year as a ground liaison officer with the United States Air Force and an A-10 squadron in Korea, and 3 years as commander of the 44th Military History Detachment. That's a pretty cool assignment, a military history detachment, to be in the Army. The 44th Military History Detachment is the only Army's active duty, where most of these units, or 34 more, are in the National Guard and the Army Reserve. And they're charged with collecting historical information for later use by the Army Center for Military History to preserve and analyze the record of the Army's activities and events. The unit collects vital records, orders, documents with video and photographs, and records interviews with key participants. During his service with the 44th Military History Detachment, the unit participated in military exercises Bright Star in Egypt, Prime Frost in Alaska. In 1983, the 44th Military History Detachment, in conjunction with the members of the Army Command and General Staff College, deployed to real-world Grenada on the intervention known as the Operation Urgent Fury, and I'm sure you remember that. Chuck went on as a Department of Army civilian in the U.S. Army Forces Command and the G3 Training Division. He coordinated Army units' participation in training events with the Air Force, Navy, Marines, plus other countries' forces. While working in all regions, his primary focus was the continental United States and the Caribbean. Chuck worked closely with the Atlantic Command to coordinate Army forces' participation in joint and combat training exercises. His key exercises were Purple Dragon, which included British airborne units, working with the U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, Marine Forces, and Millennium Challenge that exercised new concepts and equipment across this large area. During the last 10 years of his service, he helped coordinate Corps and Division headquarters level exercise and prepare FORCECOM units for command and control assignments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Chuck retired in 2010 and now enjoys interaction with his grandkids, travel and reading and teaching about World War II. And Chuck is just another fine example of the people that we have in this organization. Oftentimes, when they go, Brent, where do you get these speakers? I said, they come to my luncheons. It's wonderful to go out there and reach out and grab and invite people in, but if I just look among the people that are here, you are the greatest Americans. And it's absolutely wonderful to have a guy like Chuck. And Chuck, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, I know if he was going to do that, I would have worn my T-shirt with a big S on it and my blue tights and my red cape. But anyway, it was just stuff you did, and you just did it. So that is what you did. Today, I want to talk about a movie that I love called 12 O'Clock High. As mentioned, if you watch the movie, you will definitely see that staff car figures prominently in there several times. I'll also discuss the Army Air Corps and the explorer Malcolm Gladwell's book called The Bomber Mafia. I'll also address key materials such as B-17s and the Norden bomb sight that allowed the Allies to conduct daylight precision bombing in World War II. Let me make sure I've got my... Now, I can't see the slide, so I hope I'm on the right one. This movie's from 1949. It's about daylight precision bombing over German-held Europe, 1942 and 43. Here's a promo by Gregory Peck to get you started on it.
After we looked at 12 O'Clock High at the studio, I asked Darryl Zanuck's permission to tell you about it. volunteered to do this because I believe that 12 O'Clock High is a particularly fine picture. Because of its daring and exceptional honesty, it touches a new limit of human emotion and experience. It shows what actually happened to 12 men in one group of the 8th Air Force, what they had to take and how they took it. 12 men as their women never knew them. The role of Savage in 12 O'Clock High is the most satisfying I've ever played. Savage is an exceptional personality who dares to be all things to 12 men. A man who crosses wings with destiny. But stop worrying about it and about yourselves. Stop making plans. Forget about going home. Consider yourselves already dead. Once you accept that idea, it won't be so rough.
On your toes, high squadron, low squadron, here they come. 12 O'Clock High. Watch it, Cobb. They're heading for the high squadron.
Because 12 O'Clock High is good, powerful entertainment, I urge you not to miss it. Thank you.
So this is the agenda I'm going to follow. And I don't know who these 12 women are that didn't know about their men there, but you won't either because they're not in the picture. There's only one woman in the picture. It's a nurse, and she has 4 lines. This is about the men of the 8th Air Force. I'd said at one time it'd be hard to make this picture today, but I was wrong. Masters of the Air did a superb job. Of course, they took a lot longer than an hour and a half to do it. But if you ever look for a movie that you want to watch, and see something about World War II, 12 O'Clock High is a good one to do. Now, as I said, this is the agenda. Going to talk a little bit about the origins of the Air Force, the Bomber Mafia, talk about the B-17, the Flying Fortress, and then talk about the film itself, preparation, making it, and so on. Now, 12 O'Clock High was made in 1949. That's 75 years ago. I can contrast it with another movie that was made in 1948 called Command Decision. Now, that was a stage play, and all the action is as if you were on a stage. So both movies have the same focus, the bombing campaign in Europe, but Command Decision lacks the feel of actually being there. And it did have a star-studded cast, Clark Gable, well, for the time, Clark Gable, Walter Pidgeon, Brian Donlevy, Van Johnson, etc. So to start with the Air Force, the first airplane was the Wright Flyer. It's for the Army Signal Corps. It's a good way to take messages from point to point. Here's a Wright Flyer with a Signal Corps lieutenant receiving instruction. His instructors are guys named Orville and Wilbur. And when the pilot graduated, not only got a handshake and a graduation certificate, he also got a toolkit because he's expected to keep his airplane in tip-top shape. The Army view of aviation for a long time was just supportive of ground infantry operations. So by World War I, the U.S. used French and British planes mostly. Did it have the Curtiss Jenny, the JN? That's how you get the name Jenny. It was in the U.S., but it never left the U.S. We also made British bombers on the British design. You'll see some of that. And there was only a modest improvement over the years. And Britain also experienced air raids during the First World War. Many people are not aware of that. So here are some of the planes. The U.S. Air Service Signal Corps used the British planes, but mostly they used French planes. The 94th Aerial Squadron, there you go, has your hat in the ring squadron. Now, they were only in combat from May of 1918 to November of 1918, 7 months. So people think it was a long, drawn-out period. It's actually very short. The French and U.S.-made British design, the DH-4, were used for the bombing mission. Those are the ones on the right. And these were kind of like, just reach out and drop your bomb by hand. So now Germany had bombers also, both lighter than air and fixed wing. And besides bombing tactically, they also had raids over England. 52 raids were conducted in 1915. Sorry. 1,500 civilians were killed, 3,500 were injured. Okay, in the 1930s, here are 3 aircraft, 2 bombers and a fighter. These typify what U.S. combat aviation was in the 1930s. Note that the P-26's cockpit is open. There's no canopy, just a windscreen. The Douglas B-18 on the bottom left is the Bolo. It actually edged out the Boeing entry into a competition for a 200-plane contract. And that was because the Boeing 299 model actually crashed during the competition. We'll talk about that in a second. After World War I, there was a meager sustainment for both military in general and aviation in particular. The U.S. main aim was to intercept ships coming to the U.S., and Army Brigadier General Billy Mitchell demonstrated that air power could sink those ships. British politician also Stanley Baldwin in 1932 made a speech in which he said, "Bombers will always get through." In Army aviators, the theory of air power alone could win a war was starting to grow. There were only modest improvements during those interwar years. But you can see we were ranked 5th. That's because a lot of countries didn't even have an air force. And we had 1,200 planes, mostly obsolete. Here's Billy Mitchell, shown on the left. In the center, you see him at his court-martial. He was outspoken about aviation, and for that reason, he was court-martialed. And on the right are the 2 ships, battleships that his bombers were able to sink. And here's Stanley Baldwin, the 3-time Prime Minister of England, and his statement, "The bombers will always get through," warmed the hearts of the bomber mafia. Now here's a map. Thanks. Here's a map that shows the location of the bomber mafia. Up on the upper left, you'll see Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. That's where the bomber mafia was located, at the Air Tactical School. That's far away from the headquarters, as you see in the upper right, in Washington, or the headquarters of the Air Force, which was at Langley at that time and still is. Also, if you look down, you'll see the 8th Air Force was created in Savannah, Georgia. And I use this map also to show where the filming was done for 12 O'Clock High in the Panhandle of Florida, Eglin Air Force Base, and also at Fort Rucker, or actually now Fort Novosel, and at Ozark, Alabama. The Air Corps Tactical School, or ACTS, were the instructors who said that basically the theory was you don't need to have armies. You can actually go to the center of the industrial heart of the enemy and destroy that industrial capacity to make war. Here's some of the instructors on the left and key students on the right. Note Hansel Haywood is one of the instructors. Also note Hap Arnold, Jimmy Doolittle, Ira Aker, Carl Spatz, and even Curtis LeMay. Sorry. There we go. There's the slide, sorry. If you look down on that also, you'll see that Robert Olds is one of the instructors, and his son actually flew in World War II, P-38s, and also in Vietnam. His name is Robin Olds, and very noted and good tactician in air warfare. Here are the pictures of some of the personnel we talked about. Ira Aker, Jimmy Doolittle, Haywood Hansel, Hap Arnold, and General Spatz, and also Curtis LeMay. Doesn't Curtis LeMay look like he wants to jump out and have a fight with you? Any questions at this point? Okay. Let's talk about the B-17. Probably the most recognizable U.S. bomber of World War II. Was designed and made by Boeing Aircraft in Seattle, Washington. It was the first truly modern four-engine heavy bomber. It was all metal and used a mono wing. In 1933, the Army had a competition for a new multi-engine plane to replace the B-10. Now, Douglas and Martin submitted twin-engine designs. Boeing submitted a four-engine design, the Model 299. The AC specs were carry a useful bomb load at an altitude of 10,000 feet for 10 hours at a top speed of 200 miles per hour with a desired 250 miles per hour and a range of 2,000 miles. Now, the Boeing 299 crashed, and so the contract went to the B-18. The Boeing crashed because they didn't take the control locks out, and that brought about the use of checklists. But the Army Air Corps wanted the B-17, so they ordered 23 test models of the Y-1B-17. Now here's a picture of the 299 on the left, both in flight on the top picture and what it looks like if you don't take the control locks out. And on the right is the YB-117. Now the name came from a newspaper reporter who saw the 5 machine guns sticking out of the B-17 and dubbed it a flying fortress. Boeing wasn't lost on Boeing. This is a great tool for marketing, and so the name stuck. Originally, they were armed with 5 30 caliber machine guns to fight off enemy fighters. Later models had up to 13 50 caliber machine guns. You see the speed, load, range, and ceilings listed on the slide here. And note on those ceilings, these planes are not pressurized. Get a plane today, it goes up to 37,000 feet, you think nothing of it. These planes, as they went up, it got colder. Above 10,000 feet, you needed oxygen. And so therefore, oxygen mask and heavy clothing and gloves were mandatory. Only a few were ordered, and most of these went to the British, and they were there to close the air gap in the Atlantic. Convoys coming across got air cover from the U.S., got air cover from England, but in the middle was called the pit, and in the pit, the convoys did not have air cover and were subject to, or vulnerable to the U-boats. Original B-17s are very unlike the ones we know. These are models B, C, and D types here. They had no tail gun. And if you look underneath, you'll see the bathtub, quote unquote, under the belly that had a gun position to engage behind and underneath. Also note the vertical fin or rudder, sometimes referred to as a shark fin. Now the B-17D on the right was at Clark Air Force Base. Its name was the Swoos. There was a song out at that time about a combination swan and goose, thus the Swoos. And that's now at Wright-Patt Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, awaiting restoration. You can also look for a movie from 1943 called Air Force. And in that movie, they fly a lot of the D models with the shark tail fin. The predominant models were the E, F, and Gs. The E has that large dorsal fin, a top turret, a ball turret, and tail guns. And this is the first type used against Germany in August of 1942. The F models had a plexiglass nose, 2 machine guns called cheek guns that faced out the 2 sides that the navigator worked, and fuel and engine mods. They also began subcontracting to Douglas and to Vega, which was a part of the Lockheed organization. The Douglas made theirs at Long Beach, and Lockheed made theirs in Burbank, along with the ones being made in Seattle. The 12,731 total B-17s were built. Now, that's the third most produced bomber of World War II. B-24 was most, the Ju-88 for Germany was second, and then the B-17. Note the number of types. The G is the most numerous. Also, the B-17s, well, as I said, were built in those three plants. Here are examples of the B-17Es and Fs. The ones on the left are the Es. These are the first type, as I said, used in the air war over Germany. On the bottom right is a picture of the original Memphis Belle. After its 25 missions, it came back for a war bond tour. Here's the G model. This is the most produced variant. And Gs are easily recognized by that conspicuous chin turret, which was operated by the bombardier. The airplane had 10-man crew. If you look at from front to back, the bombardier sat in the nose, the navigator was behind him, and you got to be careful if you ask for a desk job in the Air Force. Slightly higher and behind them was the cockpit with a pilot and co-pilot. Behind them was the engineer, who was also the top turret gunner. Then came the bomb bay. Bombs were stacked horizontally. There was a catwalk between the two sides of bombs that allowed you to go front to back in the airplane. Next was the radio man, who operated a single gun in the backside of the airplane called a dorsal gun. Behind him, on the bottom of the plane, was a ball turret gunner. Then two waist gunners, and finally in the rear was the tail gunner. Now, engineers know what the device on the left is, and pilots are familiar with the device on the right. On the left is a slide rule, and on the right is an E6B circular flight calculator. Both of these are analog versus digital. And here's their big brother. This is also an analog calculator. Norden Bombsight made daylight precision bombing possible. Gyroscopes, one in each of the two unit parts, stabilized the location of the aircraft. As the plane was flying, they hit a place called the IP, the initial point. From that point on, the plane flew straight and level. And a autopilot connection to the bomb site, the bombardier actually was flying the airplane. Now, the Norden Bombsight accounts for up to 74 variables: altitude, speed, etc. And my favorite factor that it compensates for is from 20,000 feet, you drop a bomb, it takes 2 minutes for it to hit the ground. In that time, the Earth rotates. So it would move, the Earth would move 12 feet. So the Norden Bombsight compensates for that. Here's a closer look at the Norden Bombsight. You can see that in the, one of these in the Computer Museum of America in Roswell. They have one there, and it's worth going there on the tour to take a look at that. It's said to allow a bombardier to put a bomb in a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Now, that's on a clear day in Arizona with nobody shooting at you. In the clouds over Germany with fighters and flak, a little bit different story. These slides show in the upper part the ball turret, or the top turret gunner, operated by the flight engineer. It circles and it elevates. The bottom photos are of the ball turret that protruded underneath the belly. It had a dedicated crewman, arguably the most dangerous position on the airplane. The ball turret was a tight fit, so ball turret gunners were very small. The ball turret itself rotated and could put its guns down, straight down, and then come back up to the horizontal. And it had cutouts or interrupters that kept it from shooting vital parts of the airplane, such as the propellers. Kind of need those propellers. Sorry, behind on the slides. The top turret and the ball turret. Now that ball turret, if you sat in a kitchen chair and have a couple of your friends lay the chair backwards, and you sat like that for the next 6 to 8 hours, that will give you an idea of what it's like to be a ball turret gunner. Here are the two waist gun positions, left and right. The middle photo was a cover of Life magazine, and the gunner is wearing minimal gear. The left and right photos more accurately portray how a gunner would have looked. The right photo shows the gunner wearing a flak vest or apron, armor protection against bullets and shrapnel, and on the right, also note at the bottom, all the expended shell casings of .50 caliber. And finally, here's the tail gunner, probably next to the ball turret gunner, the loneliest position on the airplane. The gunner sat, basically, you could say sat, knelt, or squatted. I'm not sure which is the right term. On that little bitty bench in the middle there that you see, the little padding, and sort of knelt into that and then operated the two guns there. He had a sight bar that he saw that was connected to the two guns to allow him to aim. Now, the nemesis for the B-17 on the German side were the anti-aircraft guns and the enemy aircraft. And this is where we get the word flak. If you look at the bottom left, the Flugabwehrkanone is the German word for a flying war or conflict cannon. And you take the few letters out of that, that gives you the word flak. 88 millimeter shells were effective up to 37,000 feet. And B-17s early in 1942, 43 faced the Bf-109 Messerschmitt and the FW-190, the Focke-Wulf. Now, one thing I learned from Masters of the Air, the Germans used aerial rockets. So later, enemy fighter aircraft, primarily twin-engine Bf-110s and 210s, were armed with 4 rockets that they would essentially lob into the the bomber formations, the bomber boxes. This is what the rockets look like. It's a Wefler Granat BR-21, a 21-centimeter air-to-air rocket. That's a picture of it on the right and them loading it on the airplanes. This is how it was used. If you look, you'll see it has an upward trajectory. Think of a softball being pitched to a batter, and it goes in a kind of an upward trajectory and then falls back down. Had a 5-second fuse. It was not proximity fused, it was time fused. And so you had to release exactly 1,280 meters. And that 1,280 meters kept you out of the range of the tail gun at the time. These are flak shells exploding, the black flower blossoms. And if they had a direct hit, it could be deadly for the B-17. But the B-17 was pretty rugged and could take a lot of punishment and still bring its crews home back to England. Now, if you had to get out of the plane, you had 2 possibilities, a chest chute or a backpack type chute. And the crew members did not usually wear their chutes, but kept them nearby, especially the chest chute. They might wear the backpack. Bombardier could wear the backpack fairly easily. Everybody else, it was pretty cramped. The confines of the B-17 limited movement with the chute, in addition to their heavy clothing for the 57-degree weather or temperatures at 15 to 30,000 feet. Now, the chest chute could be quickly attached to 2 D-rings on the harness. And people have asked me, well, how many parachute jumps did they make in preparation for this? None. They were very lucky if even they got much of, hey, just snap the chute on and go out the door, or Bombay or whatever, however you get out of the airplane. So the first time they ever jumped was when they were hit and snapped that chute on and got a new experience. Now, this is a GIF diagram. If you look at it for a minute, you'll notice that it's going to have highlighting of the various what's called VICs, or Vs of bombers. And this depicts a combat bomber box. It allows the maximum number of guns for defensive operations against fighters. The combat Vs are staggered horizontally and vertically, and planes all flew within 100 feet of each other. Okay, anybody who's a pilot, think of having another plane next to you, and you're having to manually fly the plane for 6 to 8 hours and not run into each other and keep it within 100 feet. Now this GIF diagram, I'll give it a couple more seconds. We're in the middle of it right now. Wait for a second. You can see how the planes are stacked horizontally and vertically. You start with one now. There's one, then 2 and 3, and finally 4 at the very back and below. This is what it looks like looking up into a bomber box. And you see how close the airplanes are to each other. This is on a clear day. Imagine when it's cloudy. This is what it's all about, bombs away. The bombardier manually flipped a switch to release the bombs. Initially, all the bombardiers targeted through their Norden bomb sights, and when the crosshairs were on the target, they released their bombs. Later, the lead bombardier did the sighting, and everybody dropped on the lead bombardier. Questions about the B-17? Yes, sir.
So, my understanding that early in the war, when you see all the pictures and the movies, that the bombers are all painted olive drab, maybe field gray underneath. But later in the war, everything's shiny, bright aluminum.
Right.
What changed?
I think it was the fact that they didn't really need to make them olive drab. There was a waste of paint and rest of resource, and they just left them. Also, it was the speed and efficiency of the fuel, not having paint on the airplane slowed it down. Other questions?
Time early on that Boeing lost the competition because their plane crashed. What happened to the plane that won the competition?
The Bolo was used as one of the trainers. It was a very small twin-engine plane. It was a primary way to train bombardiers and navigators using the Bolo. So you started out doing that, and then they would graduate to the B-17s or B-24s. But that was used as that thing. One second, guys. You had a question?
Oh, yeah, I look at that Volterra position, and I'm thinking if I lay funny in the bed, I get a leg cramp. And so I look at that and I'm thinking, you know, was that addressed? I mean, I guess there's a hatch they can climb up into the plane while they're in the air. That's my first question.
Well, you got into the hatch when you cross the enemy coast, just before you cross the enemy coast. Well, that's about an hour into the flight. Then you've got 3 or 4 more hours. You're going to lay in that position. You'll stay in that position. You turn around and come back to the enemy coast. Once you cross the enemy coast or have fighters back supporting you, and even then, you'll be halfway over the channel before you get out of that thing. And yes, you did need help to get up and out of it. If you watch Bastards of the Air, you'll notice in one sequence, if this thing jams, you are stuck there. There's no way out. And the guns have to be lowered straight down. That rotates the top of this up to get the hatch to allow you to get out of it. If your guns are still not quite straight down, if the mechanism jams, you could hand crank it, but if a bullet had lodged in the mechanism, that guy's toast. And if that had happened too and you had to belly land, again, he's a casualty right away. Nothing you can do.
They were young too, Chuck. 18, you didn't get cramps.
Yeah, you did, but still. That question was, the comment was, they were 18 and young, and so they didn't get cramps and stuff. Yeah, they did. Also, going to the bathroom and relieving yourself was also a problem. So they tried various things, but you don't want to go there. Not worth thinking about. Okay, question over here. Yes, ma'am. The question was that the silver color made it harder for them to see the plane in the sky. I'm not sure about that. I would think if the sunlight glinted off of it, it would be like shining a mirror on it, but it may be true. Ray?
What I had significant weight savings. It decreased the production timing. That is, it's faster to produce the aircraft. It required less maintenance as the war progressed. And as it turned out, by early 1944, even late 1943, the raids on the former RAF and Army Air Force bases had diminished dramatically, so it was better bang for the buck.
Okay. Well, so one more thing. So what you've said, what Ray said was weight, amount of time to, not saving time of having to paint the airplane, save production time, and weight.
The physical weight of the paint.
Right, physical weight of the paint.
Physical weight of the paint, also maintenance costs.
And maintenance problems after to keep it up. Okay?
The other thing I was going to mention was when we were talking about I'm glad you showed the box. The interesting story about how that happened, it was then Colonel LeMay, that was the head of the bomb group, which bomb group escapes me. But the bombers, as if they were getting close to the target, they would wander around, avoid the flak, et cetera, et cetera. And he told his group, we're going to do something differently. They were losing a lot of planes, both the Luftwaffe as well as the flak. But he said that we're going to fly in tight formation, so we go out and do the bombing run once and not have to come back because we all missed the target. So we're going to have a very tight formation. We're going to stay in formation. It's going to last roughly 15 minutes from the initial point onto the target. And it was successful. The losses went down because of the concentrated firepower and so on.
Right.
But it was Curtis LeMay that came up with that
Yes.
concept.
Okay, if you can't hear the concept, what he's saying is, the comment, he's saying that Curtis LeMay came up with once we hit the IP, the initial point, we no longer take evasive action and nobody moves left, right, up, down. Everybody stays locked in till you drop the bombs. And then, but they flew tight formations because it's a tight formation. They thought they had better concentration of firepower from their guns. The original thought was a bomber didn't need escorts, and that turned out to be not quite so true. Yes, sir. You had a question? Okay. Yes, sir.
Question.
Purdell.
In the movie, you see the co-pilot or the pilot says, "Mr. Bombardier, you have the plane." And they turn the plane over to the guy with Norton
Bomb sight. That's correct.
How does that?
What would happen, they had an automatic pilot. The automatic pilot was tied in to, there are two parts to the Norton bomb sight. Both of them have gyros in them. And the sight itself and then the mechanism on the left actually tied into the automatic pilot. And now the Bombardier, as he made calculation changes, it would input those to the plane to give it directional changes to make it go wherever you want it to go. So the Bombardier was flying the plane for about the last maybe minute or 2 minutes before the bomb drop. And once he finished the bomb drop, he flipped his automatic pilot off from the bomb sight, and now the pilot is flying the plane again. And to tell the pilot, your plane, and the pilot would then take the plane back. Pumpers, passers, shakers, takers. So, okay, anybody else question? Well, let's talk about the movie, because that's what this thing's billed as. This is the order I'm going to talk about things in the movie. So 20th Century Fox was the studio that made this, and Darryl Zanuck was in charge of production. He was the producer on this movie. The cost was $1.5 million, 1949. That was a lot of money, especially for a black and white movie. It grossed $6.2 million on 14 million ticket sales. And if you wonder, hey, wait a minute, 6.2 million, 14 million ticket sales, what are you talking about? Well, at that time, a movie ticket cost you 25 to 50 cents. So that's how they did that. Today, you're going to pay probably about $15 to $20 to go in for a ticket. These are the concepts and focus of the movie. Story of early entry into the European Air War and the theory of daylight precision bombing. It was a novel concept at that time. It's a bomber group, as we said earlier, that's having hard luck. high losses, and is not getting hits in their bombing. The focus is on leadership, duty, courage, and perseverance through stressful situations. And here are 4 key themes: daylight precision bombing, maximum effort, leadership, and then mental illness. At that time, they called it combat fatigue. It could be a nervous breakdown, and I'll talk about these later. Now, comes to the title, 12 o'clock high. 12 o'clock is the direction the plane is flying. 3 o'clock is on your right. 9 o'clock is on your left. 6 o'clock is behind you. You may hear the term sometimes. Somebody says, hey, check 6, means turn around, look behind you. And you had low, level, or high. Attack by German fighters from 12 o'clock high meant a fast closing speed, fewer guns, only the top turret firing at them, and a good chance of destroying something really vital like the pilot's co-pilot, bombardier, or navigator. At a minimum, a head-on attack would probably disrupt the formation and spoil the bomber's aim. Now, Bernie Lay, one of the authors of the book's wife, hearing Bernie and Cy Bartlett, the other author, talk about these things, said, hey, 12 o'clock high sounds like a good name for this book. And that's how they got the name for the book. And also the movie. Which brings us to the story writers. Movie by Lay and Bartlett, obviously, from their book. Director Henry King, who was the director of the movie, also worked on it, but he was not credited. Lay has quite the backstory. I could stand up here all day and talk about Bernie Lay. He was a pilot, Army pilot in 1932 to 1935. He resigned in 1935, became a civilian writer, editor, and book screenplay that he made of his own story, I Wanted Wings, which was made into a movie. He rejoined the Army Aviation in 1939. In 1940, he was on Arnold's staff at headquarters of the Army, and later was on the 8th Air Force staff. He deployed to Britain early. He was a co-pilot with the 100th Bomb Group on the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. He returned to the U.S. to form and train a B-24 crew. In 1944, he deployed that B-24 group, not crew, but a group, to Britain. He flew on his 4th mission. He was shot down, parachuted, landed, picked up by the French resistance, and gotten back to England. His co-author, Bartlett, a Ukrainian, was a journalist and screenwriter for RKO. He joined the Army Air Force Film Unit, became an aide later to Karl Spatz, the commander of the European Air Forces. He was friends with Lay and suggested they write a book, and that spawned the movie. Now, the director for this movie was a man named Henry King, who was well known in Hollywood. He was one of the 36 founders of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the Academy Awards. He did 98 films over 47 years, 1917 to 1962. He was nominated to be Best Director twice, and 7 of his films were nominated for Best Picture. None of them won. Now, the cast. Numerous actors were considered for General Savage. Some were offered the role and declined it. Even Peck initially declined it until he found out King was going to direct. And then King showed him some script changes. Peck was in. Lay and Bartlett based many of their characters on real persons in the 8th Air Force. And I'll give you a chance to read this. On the left are the real characters in the 306 bomb group. In the middle are the character names in the movie, and on the right are the actors. Now, Frank Armstrong of the 306 group is closely identified as Savage. And later down, he was often asked about his breakdown. He never had a breakdown. That was somebody else, and they put it in to make the story a story. And he actually, through the rest of his life, had to say, I never had a breakdown. If you look down through there, you'll note that Paul Tibbets, I think he did something with a plane called the Enola Gay later on in the war. He was the model for Major Joe Cobb. Robert Patton, Lieutenant Jesse Bishop, flew as a navigator in World War II and was the only one with combat experience. Now, the Bishop character is based on a man named John Morgan. He's an American who joined the Canadian Air Force. He was then transferred from the Canadian Air Force to the 92nd Bomb Group and flew as a co-pilot in the 92nd Bomb Group early in the war. And his story is the one they used for the opening sequence about the Congressional Medal of Honor for Jesse Bishop. Now, don't confuse John Morgan with Robert Morgan. Robert Morgan was the pilot of the Memphis Belle. So, two last names the same, not the same guy. And here are the cast, pictures of the cast. And here's an evolution of what became the U.S. Air Force from its beginnings as a division of the Signal Corps to a section of the Signal Corps to the Air Services of the U.S. Army to the U.S. Army Air Corps, then the U.S. Army Air Forces, and finally in 1947, with the Defense Reorganization Act of 1947, they became a separate and equal service. Also, that same Reorganization Act desegregated all the services. So, fledgling U.S. Air Force, 2 years old, has a chance here to seek publicity for their role in World War II. So the U.S. Air Force was glad to cooperate in making the film. They provided 12 B-17s, even if 5 of those had been remotely controlled in the Bikini Atoll atom bomb test. So the flight crews on those had to have limitations on time because of radiation. Outside sets were built at Eglin Air Force Base, Auxiliary Field Number 3, Duke Field, and included Quonset huts, control tower, and all the other buildings of a base. And because of its black runways, which is like the runways in England, many of the air ops were filmed at Ozark Field, what is now, used to be Fort Rucker, now Fort Novosel in Alabama. And also that Ozark Field was used for the opening and closing because it had been abandoned and it was overgrown at the time they filmed the first parts of that. Now, there are 4 themes in the movie. Daylight precision bombing. Now, that was the holy grail of the bomber mafia. They insisted that to win the war alone, you could jump over the front lines and destroy German industry. And the results here were mixed. And maximum effort, both men and machines, was an undefined limit. Both were pushed to the breaking point. And fortunately for the U.S., we had the industrial might to produce over 295,000 total airplanes. Now, 31,000 of those were heavy bombers, like the B-17 and the B-24. Also, leadership. The Air Force and the Navy both used this film to help teach leadership into the 1960s. And finally, mental illness. You had World War I shell shock. World War II in Korea, you had combat fatigue. And today we have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we now recognize that as a wound to be treated and hopefully prevented. Now, is it real or is it Hollywood? The B-17s returned to base, seriously battle damaged sometimes, and while not common, they did belly land some of them. This was not by choice, but for this they had Paul Mantz, a stunt flyer. They paid him $4,500. If today they had to do that, it'd be $65,000 to belly land one of the planes. The Air Force was not real happy about that, but to get it done, they said, okay, we'll accept the damage to this plane. And 20th Century was able to sell that footage for several other films later on. Also, ball bearings versus the mission early in the war. The ball bearings weren't hit till August of 1943. So the time the U.S. number of airplanes had grown and daylight precision bombing was the norm, That raid in 1943 was 376 B-17s, split between the Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg and the ball bearing plant at Schweinfurt, and 60 planes were downed at that time. That would be 600 men. And finally, black and white versus color. Color was a norm for the movie industry at this time. Black and white was chosen because it evoked the period of World War II, and it also blended the black and white combat footage that they use, especially towards the end of the movie. And so that was 12 O'Clock High. 75 years old, still stands up. Good movie. One thing I would like to mention, you got to look in the movie. There's a lot of humor in there if you look for it. There's one where the IG is working with the pilots, and a captain comes out to report on it, tells the lieutenant, "Give me a cigarette." And the lieutenant sarcastically asks, "Do you need a light?" And he says, "Lieutenant, I have nothing but the habit." So, also there's also the scene in which seems like the sergeant who works for Savage is continually having up and downs, and at one point Savage busts him again, then tells him to put the stripes back on. He says, "If we're going to have these ups and downs, you better get them put on with zippers." So, with that, drop your questions on me. Question? Yes, Terry?
Do you know who owns the movie now? Is it TBS possibly?
I do not. I see it, I've seen it on CBS a lot, but I don't know who the owner is now. If they even have one, I don't know.
It's on YouTube, so I don't think it's got a domain.
Yep. Any other questions? Don?
I've seen the movie too, so there was never any mention of what the Royal Air Force bombing command was doing at the same time. And they were going at night when the 8th Air Force was doing daylight bombing. Now, was there any coordination in there between the Almost Command going at night?
The question was, is there any coordination between the bombing at night by the British and the daylight precision bombing in day with the U.S.? There was some. Let me go back a little bit before that. The Prime Minister of England, at that time, Churchill, and FDR met in Casablanca in 1943, just after the invasion of North Africa. And a phone call was made to Ira Aker and told him, "You better get down here right now because FDR is about to give our forces over to the British bombing and we're all going to bomb at night." And Aker had to fly immediately to Casablanca. And he was able to tell Churchill on, if we bomb during the day and the British bomb at night, we will keep the Germans off balance because it will be round-the-clock bombing. And only because of that did we have round-the-clock bombing. Now, the coordination was not always really good. And we were under the thought that we could target an industry and minimize civilian casualties and collateral damage. Not always the case, because a lot of times these bombs landed 5 and 10 miles from their targets. Again, you're flying over clouds, you're flying over areas that you're not really sure sometimes. The navigators were not all that precise sometimes. Later on in the war, we wound up going to area bombing through radar that basically said, the industry we want is here, and we think we're on it, and it basically was saturation bombing. That was kind of where the end of the war was. Any other questions? If not, thank you very much.